Welcome to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Proverbs. We begin chapter 21 today. In the Lord's hand, the king's heart is, or is like, a stream of water that he, God, channels towards all who please him. This verse reminds us that we can take comfort in the fact that God holds our heart in his hand, even the heart of a powerful king or prime minister or president. God has the final authority, the final sovereignty over all of us, not some powerful political leader. The heart represents the desires, goals, and plans of man. And this water represents God's blessings. So God decides when and where he will direct his blessings and how much patience he will endure before he intervenes. Next, a person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord examines, judges the heart. Man, in his own mind, has the ability to rationalize, to justify almost any decision or behavior. We attempt to convince ourselves that we are noble, that we are right. We're doing something for, quote, good reasons. Rarely do we admit that our reasons are greed, power, or pride. The author is telling us we can often fool ourselves and perhaps others, but we cannot fool God. That is why each of us are called to pray David's prayer from Psalms and ask God to search and know our hearts and to point out, to convict, to reveal our true motives and to put us back on the path that leads to his blessings. Next, a profound verse. To do what is right and just, is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. This word sacrifice here means religious service. Yes, God wants and appreciates the fact that we go to church, that we give to the poor, we study his word. But are we truly walking our talk? God is really more important how we live than what we give. If our life and heart are not right and just, religious good deeds are meaningless. So right and just are not just reserved for Sunday. The expectation is that you and I would walk right and just each day. Haughty eyes, meaning looking down on others, and a proud heart, the unplowed field of the wicked, produce sin. This verse's syntax is a bit awkward, so you've got two potential interpretations. It says that the prideful, uncaring, arrogant heart is the root of all sinful life. A prideful life is like an unplowed field in that it produces no fruit, or, another interpretation, if you plow a field with a prideful heart, it'll produce sin, not fruit. Next, a general statement. The plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty. Diligence, dedication, planning lead to profit. But haste, cutting corners, acting without thought, without planning, that leads to poverty. Next, a repeated warning. A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare. Ill-gotten gains will be fleeting, will not last. And rather than bring security and peace, they will only bring problems. The violence of the wicked will drag them away, for they refuse to do what is right. Those that rashly choose violence as a solution will be dragged away. Dragged away is the same term used as a fish being caught and uncontrollably dragged away. Inflicting violence gets violence. Jesus told Peter in the garden, all who rashly choose to draw the sword will die by the sword. Next, we have the way of the guilty is devious, but the conduct of the innocent is upright. Our conduct reveals our character. Our actions tell folks who we really are rather than our words. Those that choose to be dishonest, manipulative, devious, very often are attempting to hide their offenses and their guilt. But those that are innocent have the freedom to walk upright without the burden of guilt or unconfessed sin. Next, advice about choosing a spouse. Better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife or spouse. The Jewish homes at this time had a flat roof that served kind of like a lanai. And this flat roof, Proverbs is telling us here, it's better to live in peace outside of a small portion of that roof than living inside with a stressful, quarrelsome spouse. Next, the wicked crave, they desire evil. Their neighbors get no mercy from them. This is an important passage in that it places the primary cause of evil on the person, not their circumstances. And that cause is very often their cravings. The wicked choose to satisfy their fleshly cravings versus having godly compassion. Rather than caring for our neighbor as called by God, the wicked inflict harm on their neighbor in the absence of mercy. Next, another repeated verse from chapter 19 regarding first the mocker, then the simple, and then thirdly the wise. When a mocker is punished, the simple gain wisdom. By paying attention to the wise, they get knowledge. Recall that the mocker is the person that's hostile, hard-hearted towards God and God's followers. They reject his wisdom with disdain. The second group is the simple. They're not necessarily negative towards God. They just make no effort to gain God's wisdom. They choose to ignore God. The verse is saying that it's a teaching tool for the simple. It's best to teach them by example, by testimony, by walking, not necessarily talking, by demonstrating God's love and God's peace and God's joy. They also see that the bad choices of the mocker does not end well. The righteous one takes note, is aware of the house of the wicked and brings the wicked to ruin. The NIV translation capitalizes the righteous one, which would interpret it as a reference to God, which would mean that we can take comfort in that our God of justice knows the deeds of the wicked and will hold them accountable. Next, another godly warning. Whoever shuts their ears to the cry of the poor will also cry out and not be answered. God promised to bless those that treat others as we wish to be treated, especially the poor. He said that whatever we did for the least of these, we did for him. He also promised he would be merciful to those that showed mercy. And he promised how we judge and treat others, that's how we will also be judged. And lastly, sadly, Jesus promised, I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. This very sad phrase, I never knew you, sadly means that Christ stood at the door and knocked, and the door was never open. That they never attempted to know God. So either it was the mocker who rejected God, or it was the simple who chose to ignore God. Another sad statement about human nature that existed 3,000 years ago and still exists today. A gift given in secret soothes anger, and a bribe concealed in the cloak, meaning illegal, pacifies great wrath. This verse, of course, is not condoning bribery, which is typically used to subvert justice. The verse is stating simply that bribes are indeed very effective, back then and now today also. And turning away anger means here to avoid criminal or civil punishment. The implication is that the rich have this advantage over the poor in that they can subvert the law. And that's what's following in the next verse, verse 15. When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to the evildoers. for those that follow God, when justice finally prevails, when things are set right by God, it brings joy and peace to those that prefer righteousness. This word joy is an internal condition. It comes from a sense of security and peace, knowing that God ultimately is in charge, and he always will prevail over evil. That gives us comfort, joy, and peace. We shall stop there and begin with verse 16, chapter 21 next week, and finish the chapter. And we only got 10 more chapters to go. Until then, may God bless you. May he bless your family with both grace and peace. Aloha.